Good morning, afternoon. Thank you, Melissa, for that. It's, when I sit and listen to all the things that I've done, it's a little bit overwhelming. But I'm the kind of person who was taught to keep my head down and work really hard. And I've done that my whole life. I'll be 68 this year, so it's been a long time. And a big kiss to the lady who bought me a photo of myself at an event in the Northern Neck in Westmoreland State Park in 2003. I looked so much younger then. So I've been doing this a long time, but it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you here today in celebration of our 250th anniversary of the Revolution of the United States of America. What an amazing accomplishment. Speaking of accomplishments, give America a hand. And those who made that possible. When I look at the history of our tribe, and I look at the value systems that we grew up with, our elders taught us to take care of community, to make sure that everyone had whatever it was that they needed, and to work hard to bring justice to your people. And I've done that for these 68 years. And now, in the process that we have here today, after federal recognition and being able and having the ability to restore or rematriate the 3 towns on Fones Cliffs that our tribe originated from when the colonists came, I was thinking about their leadership style back at that time and what the English might have felt when they came here and they witnessed the freedom, the autonomy of these various tribes and their sovereignty coming from a tyrannical government being constrained and controlled. They must have felt like they were at summer camp. And they liked what they saw because a man could be anything he wanted to be, and he could be judged upon his hard work and his care for his community. And I believe that that's one of the things that made the Northern Neck a hotbed for revolution. When you look at the kind of people that were here, you had the Lee brothers writing the Leedstown Resolves. They were rebelling because they didn't want to have to pay taxes to the king. Well, the tribes didn't pay taxes. Why should we have to pay taxes? And then you had James Madison, you had George Washington's family, all of these American leaders right here in the Northern Neck, incubating and birthing this revolution that would bring freedom to all of America. We call them our founding fathers, but I know that the tribes and the things that they practice in government were all a part of that foundation. I'm proud to have come from the Northern Neck. The people are fantastic. They're friendly. They're family. And they work really hard, and they take care of their community. Does this sound familiar to you? And so I believe that there were ideals that the tribes practiced in our both religious and social structures that have become the foundation of our nation. I'm sorry to say that it didn't carry on into this generation. But I know growing up, those were principles and pillars of structures in our community and in our government. And so I'm glad to celebrate the revolution today with you, the descendants of those first founding fathers that came to this land, and they stood here, and the spirit of freedom that God, our Creator, placed on this land was placed here long before the English ever came. But they loved it, and they received it. And because they did, we are the leaders of the free world today. I'm very grateful for that, and I thank God for it. I would just like to start by saying a little bit about how long we've been around. I think I'm old. But we've been around quite a while. The people who live on the Rappahannock River Valley have lived here for 10,000 years. The oldest site found in Virginia is the Cactus Hill site in Sussex County. It dates back 16,000 years. There were migratory bands at first through about 5,000 years ago. These hunter-foragers began to become semi-sedentary as they learned how to feed their families from the abundant resources of the rivers, creeks, and forests. They could limit their seasons of foraging and hunting to smaller areas. Extended families returned to seasonal encampments each year. And so when Smith came and he began to map the towns of the tribe, he didn't understand that we were summertime vacation, because we love the oyster and the crabs in the summertime. And in the wintertime, we went back, retreated off of the riverfront into our winter hunting grounds, which is over in Indian Neck. And as you look, now that GPS is prevalent for everyone, as the crow flies, 3 miles from Indian Neck is the Rappahannock River. Isn't that amazing? And so we protected ourselves in the wintertime. We could hunt if we needed to, but we also stored the goods coming from the river and from the land to be utilized in the wintertime. About 3,000 years ago, settlement patterns consisted of base camps on the coastal plain and in the Piedmont that were linked to smaller, limited purpose sites along the fall zone around modern-day Fredericksburg. In other words, groups of people were beginning to form territorial places along the upper and lower Rappahannock River, but they tended to share the area around the fall zone with other tribes. Groups from below the fall line went there to hunt and to collect stones that could be shaped into sharpened tools like stone axes, stone knives, and spear tips. The bow and arrow did not exist yet. I say groups because it's still too early to talk about the tribe as a unit of social and political organization. About 1,800 years ago, settlement patterns consisted of small and intermediate-sized groups. They were located both along rivers and in the interior along the ridge lines of elevated necklands where freshwater springs could be found. Intermediate-sized sites functioned as base camps. These things are what leads to the formation of social, political tribes with chiefdoms, counselors, and priests, government structures. Technological change led to social, religious, and political change. And all of those factors were more deeply connected people to the places where their ancestors were buried. In other words, tribes developed a heightened sense of territoriality. All of this rooted in where people live and the power of place. This residence in the same place, same time, intermemorial, is perhaps the most fundamental truth of what the Rappahannock people are. By 1200 AD, large permanent villages had become the norm. As tribes grew in size, smaller villages continued to support larger towns within a tribe's geographic territory. These similar villages provided both territorial defense and access to specific resources like food and building materials. From 1200 to 1500, the archaeological research has found that there were significant population increases across the Chesapeake Tidewater in general, but more so in the northern neck. The village counts and population estimates made by John Smith in the summer of 1608 show that the northern neck, and specifically the north bank of the Rappahannock River, were the most densely populated region in the Chesapeake Tidewater. Also during this time, individual tribes began to form alliances with neighbors to defend from external threats, primarily from the north of the Chesapeake. The Iroquois from New York began expanding south. They pushed the Susquehannock from Pennsylvania to Maryland. This put pressure on the Piscataway in Maryland to come south into the northern neck. The tribes on the northern neck no doubt felt those threats as well as these northern tribes came in. Powhatan comes into power in the late 1500s and creates the first multi-tribal chiefdom that spans the Chesapeake Tidewater. The region at some point becomes known as Senecamaca, which means the place where the people live. So even after the climate begins to produce more rain, it's still another 100 years before the new technologies and belief systems firmly connected the people to the place, and we start to see large permanent village communities established. As for these technologies, corn arrived in the northern neck around 1100 years ago. How the bow and arrow arrives on the northern neck about the same time. As the belief systems or the religion, evidence for that can be seen in new burial customs that began across the region around 900 AD. It takes about 300 years for women to learn how to grow corn reliably, and about the same time for men to learn to use the bow and arrow. These are both connected to the deity Okeas, which was the good god that the Powhatans worshipped. He taught women how to plant corn and men how to hunt with bows and arrows. It takes so long to accommodate the new things because these were spiritual events that were connected to ceremonies and rituals. Understanding that these would be a new way of life. People had to learn the rituals that made the corn grow. Men had been hunting in groups for thousands of years. The bow and arrow emphasized their hunting abilities for the individual overall group. So men had to learn the rituals and the ceremonies that were connected to hunting in this new way. And then rituals were created to celebrate an abundance of harvest of whatever their people needed to survive. As for the burial customs, These were secondary burial ossuaries, like the Rappahannock ossuary at Cat Point Creek. This was uncovered in 1947 during a highway project. So you could say from the period of 900 to 1200 AD was a time of a revolutionary change in the Northern Neck. New horticultural technology, new hunting technology, new burial customs. Not all tribes agreed with this intrusive oversight of Powhatan when he comes on the scene. The Rappahannock Tribe, while it was aligned with him in many things, kept their autonomy and continued to take care of their people as they had for thousands of years. This is this situation in the Chesapeake Tidewater when at the same time, unknown point in the late 1500s, the name of the Rappahannock River is changed from Opiscatumack to Rappahannock. So we believe that there was a tribe here named Opiscatumack that controlled the region, and that the Rappahannocks, having been called in history the Great Rappahannocks, was because of the large population that probably moved them out during war or whatever. So we took over. And now we will talk a little bit about the chronology of the colonial period. But I wanted to give you that background to let you know that you're really walking on history every day in this place. You can't go anywhere which you don't really find items and objects from the past. One of the young ladies bought me an axe head today that she had found on her property years ago, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. As we have lost many of the physical objects of our past that remind us of who we are, it's important for us to have those today to give them to the next generation so that they don't forget who they are and where they come from. My dad used to have a saying, and we had these, I call them proverbs now because I don't have a better word for them, but they were little life sayings. And when your parents saw that you were struggling with something, they would drop one of these little sayings to you for you to think about. And he would always say, if you don't know where you came from, you can't possibly know where you're going. Think about that. That's a life lesson. In 1590, the approximate date of the change of the name of the river to Rappahannock, also approximate date of Powhatan's rise in his paramount chiefdom. A great, meaning tall, English sea captain sailed up the Rappahannock River in 1603 and had a seemingly good meeting with the Rappahannock leaders. But then he slew the king and took a number of his people with him back to England. We don't know the sea captain's name, but in 1603, a very tall sea captain named Samuel Mace sailed into the Chesapeake Bay and returned to England with a group of native men who gave canoe demonstrations on the Thames River in London in December of 1703. In 1607, English came into the Chesapeake Bay and made their way up the Powhatan River, which would become known as the James after King James. News of their arrival traveled very fast. The Rappahannock Werewants, or chief, heard that the new visitors were going to pass the hay to the Chickahominy tribe to visit them. And so he met them at the river's edge at Wecuppom, which was across the James River, and invited them to come there, where he would feed them and treat them kindly. A number of his men began to scout out Wecuppom, and they eventually went there, and he fed them and had a meal for them, just as he had described. And there is a vivid description of this werewolves that Captain Newport met. However, he didn't take them over to pass the hay. They were waylaid and taken over later. John Smith was exploring up the Chickahominy River, and he went ashore, leaving 2 companions with the boat. They were ambushed, and Smith was taken captive with a captive of Opechancanough, who was the brother of Chief Powhatan and the war chief of Pamunkey. John Smith was taken all around the different tribal communities to see if he was the one who had killed the Rappahannock king and stolen his people. He came to the Rappahannock's capital town in Rappahannock, which was probably on this side of the river and not on the other side. And as they looked at him, he was too short and too hairy. And so they let Powhatan know that he was not the man who had accosted their king and stole their people. And so Powhatan did respect the tribe's opinion on things as he was trying to identify if this man was the criminal or not. Of course, at that time, Smith was still aboard the boat in the jail for treason and trying to take over Christopher Newport's voyage. Powhatan, at that point, took him to Wecuppom, where he was adopted as a Powhatan and given a native name and given a village where the English could live. Powhatan said Jamestown was a mosquito swamp and nobody could live there. That's what presented Smith's narrative as being saved by Pocahontas. This is a very significant event whereby Powhatan attempts to exert his authority over the English. I think that it is very significant that the Rappahannocks are the last stop on Smith's tour, and that Powhatan wanted to know what the Rappahannock thought about Smith before he decided to take him to Wecuppom. I think the corn that grew in the capital town of Rappahannock on the south side of the river, not the main Rappahannock town that we know of today. It was December in 1607, and I think that the corn and the massive deer hunts in the Middle Peninsula probably provided much food for the from the Nansatico all the way down. In 1608, we had an encounter with John Smith as he mapped the Chesapeake Bay and its river tributaries. We did not participate in Opechancanoug's 1622 uprising against the English settlement, and the Rappahannocks did not participate in Opechancanoug's March of 1644 uprising against Jamestown. Colonel Moore Fauntleroy signed an agreement with the Rappahannock werewolves, Chief Capt, to purchase approximately a 40 square mile of the Rappahannock land. It was the land between the Totoskee and the Moratico Creeks. From the river inland and the headwaters of the creeks, which is also the ridgeline of the Northern Neck, Capt died on the way to Jamestown to confirm the sale. Fauntleroy met with the new Rappahannock Werewants, Tauren, to confirm the land sale. It's worth noted that Fauntleroy never paid in full for the parcel of land or others that he took possession of around 1660. The Rappahannock chief took him to court in Jamestown and won the case, though Fauntleroy never paid and relied on county courts to support and validate his land claim. In 1662, the acrimony elevated to a level that the Virginia General Assembly barred Fauntleroy from holding any civil or military office in the colony. The Rappahannock were living at Cap Point Creek, then their capital town. Their village was said to be about 2 miles inland. The Maratica had joined the Rappahannock around 1651 and were living in a village on Totoski Creek, near where Route 3 crosses the creek today. In the records, that town is called Ashuta. That's probably where Indian Fields, the reference that you see on the sign in the area, comes from. The Virginia Assembly declares that no more Indian land can be sold until towns were mapped and bound for the tribes. There was a 3-mile buffer zone ordered by the council to be around each tribal reservation or boundary land. Rappahannock Treaty was with Lancaster County in 1652. The treaty describes the location of the Rappahannock's principal town, while not mentioning the second town. Perhaps notable, the terms of the treaty guarantee Native people access to English county courts to have claims redressed as more and more colonists encroached on their set-aside land. There are also penalties imposed on tribal people for killing English hogs and cattle. Lastly, the Rappahannock Werewants, Tarwing, requested that the English build an English-style house for him and his council. This is a great document because it shows the growing power of county government over the provincial government to secure and expand the Virginia frontier. It's also suggestive that the Rappahannocks had some bargaining power over the treaty negotiation. The Virginia Assembly ordered a defensive march against the Rappahannock. The documents do not say why. Lancaster, Northumberland, Westmoreland County militants joined in a march and mustered 170 men against the tribe. At this meeting, the Rappahannock Werewants, Taurine, was killed. It was the second Rappahannock Werewants to die in 5 years, and the third of those whose deaths the English were directly responsible. Taurine's death marked the end of armed Rappahannock resistance to English settlement in the Rappahannock River Valley. The Rappahannock Tribe concluded with the newly formed Lancaster County and Rappahannock County, Old Rappahannock. The treaty mirrors the 1653 Lancaster Treaty, except that this new treaty includes a provision that guarantees the good treatment of Indian children sent to live in English homes. What's important about this document is that it shows that the Rappahannock at the county level were living still on the north side of the river, and the labor provisions demonstrate how the colony's 1656 Act for civilizing Indians, passed March of 1656, were being implemented at the county level. Old Rappahannock County also signs a treaty with the Mattaponi, who are living at the headwaters of the Piscataway Creek, and the Rappahannock are still living on Cap Point Creek. In the early 1662, Rappahannock Werewants Wecuppom and his counselors were on their way to Jamestown with Roanoke, which was, as we know today, Wampum, to pay their annual tribute to the governor. Fauntleroy captured and imprisoned the Rappahannock leaders, took the governor's tribute as ransom for their release, and then took them to Jamestown, where he accused them of not paying their tribute to the governor. At Jamestown, Wecuppom complained that Fauntleroy had not only imprisoned him and his council illegally, but that any civil military office in Virginia, Fauntleroy was ordered to pay Wecuppom 15 match coats before he left Jamestown, and the remainder of what he had owed them to be settled. There is no evidence that that payment was ever made. The tribe moved to the south side of the river. Radical living in Totuskee also moved to the south side of the river with them as more English encroachment came to take up their allotted lands. The Indian census was taken, and it shows that the Rappahannock and the Totochees, the Totuskees, living on the south side of the Rappahannock River. The map doesn't say where. Specifically, it could have been in the vicinity of Mount Landing Creek, which would still give them river access. And it may have been more inland and closer to Indian Neck in their winter hunting grounds. Estimated that the two towns on the south side had 70 bowmen each, which is about 350 people each village. During Bacon's Rebellion, the tribes on the Middle Peninsula hid in the Dragon Run for protection. This was around 1675, 1677. The Pamunkey and the Nansettico left the Dragon Run and went to negotiate with the governor for peace. The result was the Treaty of Middle Plantation in 1677. In 1678, Cokakeski, who was the queen now of Pamunkey, complains to the Virginia Council that the Chickahominies and the Rappahannocks were not obeying her orders as the treaty required them to do. The Rappahannock town near modern-day Indian Neck was mapped. It included 4,374 acres plus a three-mile boundary line around the town, which colonists promptly ignored, and which the local sheriff did not enforce, even though he was ordered to do so by the governor and council. In 1683, as the three-mile buffer was not enforced, 13,322 that lay the town's map boundaries was patented by an Englishman. The Iroquois were attacking down the Mattaponi and Rappahannock River. The Virginia Council voted to move the Rappahannock out on the frontier, which got the tribe away from English settlements and made the Rappahannock an unwilling defensive buffer against the attacks of the Iroquois. The Rappahannock were given a choice between having I had to have light up here because this typing was so small. A new town mapped for them or moving to the tribal town of Portabago, Nansettico, which is north on 17. The Rappahannock chose Portabago as it was a contemporary tribal town of trading and commerce. At least the minutes of the Virginia Council says that they did choose Portabago. The Rappahannock's belongings were moved to Portabago. The documents say Nansettico, but the tribe ends up staying on the south side of the Rappahannock, which by this time was generally referred to as Portabago. The French Huguenot, Durand de Dauphiné, spent Christmas with Ralph Wormley at his 10,000-acre tract plantation on the north side of the Rappahannock River, adjacent to the Nansettico town. De Dauphiné described meeting the Rappahannock and trading English-grown corn for Indian-made pottery. Nansetico complained several times that the Virginia Council, their English neighbors, were encroaching on Nansetico land and letting their hogs eat Nansetico crops. The council referred the matter to the House of Burgesses, and they did nothing. So in August of 1704, the Nansetico attacked and murdered a nearby family, John Rowley. The militia rounded up all the Nansetico that they could find. They held a quick trial and hanged 7 Nansetico men. Everyone else over the age of 12 was sold into slavery to Antigua because the Indian commissioner at the time, his daughter was engaged to be married to the ambassador to Antigua. And he was making a deal for her. And Essex County militia headed Lieutenant Colonel Richard Covington and ordered him to remove the remaining Indians from Portabago, presumably down the Portabago-Chickahominy Indian Trail that cut across the Middle Peninsula near Beasley, Virginia, and took them into Essex County line and turned them out in King and Queen. So that is the historical record that helps us end up in Indian Neck, which is now King and Queen County, all those years ago. So we've been around a long time, and we've been through a number of moves for a number of reasons. But the main reason is that we're still here, so that we could finally get the justice that our people have so long deserved. They've fought for, sacrificed for, died for on this very ground. And I am proud to be one of them and proud to be leading such a magnificent group of people who, no matter what comes in their face, they never give up. And they fight to the end. And so the work that I'm doing now, I don't have to die over unless I work myself into the ground. But it's still the same principle. And so for years and years and years as a 4th generation chief in my family, I watched my grandfather and my great uncles before him work tirelessly for no money, taking money out of their meager pockets because they couldn't get jobs, they couldn't get education. We educated our own people. We didn't get public education until 1964, and it was on an executive order of the governor of Virginia that we were able to enter the public school system. So when you think about all the obstacles that we have faced, it's a miracle that I'm standing here today and 300 plus members of our tribe are alive and doing well and now recognized by the federal government for the treaties that were signed with the King of England on behalf of the colony of Virginia. So our treaty is not just one of the treaties that was signed by the United States as Western expansion went across the Mississippi. But our treaty is a treaty of international stature that can only be heard at The Hague because of its international partnership that signed that treaty. Today, we are getting back some of the things that we had lost, the right to hunt and fish in Virginia outside of Virginia law because it was in the treaty for survival. Not that we're going to go out and commercially start fishing and hunting, but we are able to do that for survival of our people without a license and without being controlled by anybody in the state. And that's so nice to have after all this time. You think about it when your lands and your rivers and you have to jump through all these hoops to even be able to fish and hunt on your own land. And so that's one of the benefits of that international treaty. And so we are here today building and rebuilding our tribal government structures, rematriating the 3 towns that were over here on Vaughn's Cliffs. I know probably many of you have read about Piscatawak and Chesapeake and Wecuppom. Those are the towns that we first met Captain John Smith at. We volleyed arrows at him to defend our homeland in 1608 when he came up our river, and we've been defending it ever since. We have gotten one of those towns back. We are working with our partners, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and many others, to reacquire those properties, to protect them from development. Also, to protect our cultural resources and the bones of our ancestors that we know lie in the ground there. So it's exciting to be able to get these lands back. They are protected forever in conservation easements, so you never have to worry about a casino hanging off the cliff or anything like that. We want to protect this because it is sacred ground to us. I believe it's sacred ground to you and many of the people who live in this area. I can't wait until we get it back and we open it up to the public like we've done this. We got this back in October as a transfer from U.S. Fish and Wildlife because they were going to demolish this building. This building, I used to come to Christmas parties at this building when I was a young woman, and there have been so many weddings and Christmas parties and family reunions and everything at this location for many of the families here in the Northern Neck over the years. And to think that they would have destroyed that was unconscionable to me, and so I went to work. And I asked if we could get it, we would renovate it and we would maintain it inside the refuge because they're our partners, and we would still keep it here for families who wanted to use it. And so I'm very proud of the fact that we are able to preserve this for the families in the Northern Neck to be able to use forevermore. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all coming out today to listen to me. I hope you've learned a little bit more about the tribe than you knew before. We do, once we are renovating the downstairs, we're putting a new roof on, and we're putting new railings and decking here because it's been deteriorated. I do want to have an open house and invite all of the Northern Neck back to be able to meet the tribe, learn a little bit about us, and understand that you can still rent this building if you want to. Thank you so much.